tonight what we're doing is a bit like what we did in that planes of the face lesson, except it's just a simple exercise tonight. We're going to draw this same face from a front and side view simultaneously. And the idea behind that is to see it as three-dimensional forms rather than a flat surface, which, as I say, I think that's kind of the main challenge when drawing a face, is remembering that you're modeling a three-dimensional terrain that curves backwards on the sides of the face and the nose protrudes, and that you've got all those angles, and that becomes a lot clearer when you're looking at the same time at a front and side view like this. This is by no means a template for drawing the face, because the size and proportions of eyes, nose, mouths and ears vary massively between people, so you have to draw all different kinds of faces and people to get good at drawing the face. So it's not about a template, it's more about seeing each part of the face as it relates in X, Y, left, right space and front to back space, 3D. And just to show an example of that, so here you can see the proportions and angles are all quite different, but the essential direction of the planes and the way they take the light remains pretty much the same. This is front and side of Bruce Willis, and you can see the shape of his nose, the surface area on his upper lip is very different to the model we're working on. The shape of his eyes and even the way his eyelid connects to his eyebrow is quite different to the model we're working on. But this was a model where I could find a good clear front and side view, and although it's a male, I kind of liked how his eye and his mouth had a slight feminine quality to them, so I felt like we've got something sort of in between here to work with. So what we're going to be doing, I'm going to have to cover up his ear for now because I need the space there to draw, so I'm just going to sort of cover that up and put a line down the middle. And I want to do this front and side at the same time, so you may want to just very lightly sketch a horizontal line to represent the eye line. Keep it quite light, so just run a horizontal line and then sketch a vertical line just to represent the center of the nose. And you don't have to put this in, but you can roughly try and measure, if you want to, where the very base of the nose is and put a little line in. But keep it light so that you can change it if you want to. All right, so let's start with drawing the eye from the front view. And you'll have to excuse me, I don't know the anatomy terms for a lot of these parts, but so I'm just going to use my sort of terminology. But let's start with the upper lid along where the eyelashes are. Now notice we've always got the tear duct there on the inside. That's an important part, and if you don't put that in, eyes can look a little bit funny, so usually that's just a little nook. Now we've got this first angle, pretty much a 45-degree angle going up like that. And then we sort of have a curve going from sort of horizontal and down to our eye line. And the top lid like this, you can often sketch it darker because that's where the eyelashes are, and it's also a downward facing plane, so it's going to form a shadow. When you sketch the lower lid, you want to usually go a little bit lighter with that. On males, that can sometimes be pretty much invisible light-wise. On females, like drawing books will often tell you to make the lower lid darker on the outside where I've just sketched here, because sometimes maybe that's accentuated with makeup or eyelashes are darker there. Now let's put in the upper lid. That's something that's also, it's not good to forget that. Makes your eyes look more realistic. And let's, actually before we put in the lower lid, now let's move over to the right and put in, let's start sketching it from the side. I want us to keep jumping back and forth so that we're seeing this as a three-dimensional object. So on the right, if we were to draw the upper lid, it's just this sort of curve going back like so. Now notice how far back the eyeball is actually from the front of the lid. When you see this side view, you can see the three-dimensionality of it. And if I sketch the eyeball here on the reference, you know, the actual shape of the eyeball is, you know, something like that. And so when you're drawing it, keep that in mind. That's the edge of a sphere there. So that's set quite far back. The front of the eye there, the front of the iris. And then we've got the lower lid. And the fold of the upper lid. All right, going back to the front view, let's put in the iris. Now, positioning of this is quite important because if you get it wrong, it can really change the person's expression. They can make them look alarmed or... so I'm going to sketch it in quite lightly first. And we put in the pupil. When shading an eye, if you're putting in the markings on the iris, it usually is shadowed by the upper lid a little bit, so you can usually go a little bit darker around the top and then a little bit lighter around the bottom. And then if you can then erase out the highlight, or you can leave the highlight while you're sketching, but I'm just going to erase it out here. So I've got a bit of a highlight on the iris itself and then a smaller one on the pupil. Oops, that's a little bit too central. And there is a little highlight on the side view pupil as well, if you look closely. Okay, and then we want to actually put in that little line to indicate the tear duct there, just that little line in the corner there. It's quite important. Now, as I said, the eyeball, three-dimensional sphere, so that's what that lower lid line there is representing. It might be faint in different people, but that's showing you that what's under the surface there is a three-dimensional sphere, so let's just sketch that in. Okay, and let's put in some of the eyelashes now. Trick with doing eyelashes is don't do individual ones pointing all in the same direction, but join them at the tip. I haven't really done that on the reference here, but when I draw eyelashes, I usually will kind of join them at the tip, so like I'm drawing little teepee type tints, if you know what I mean. It tends to look more natural. And the person's got quite long lashes, as you see in the profile view. So it's good to look at that's what we're actually drawing in that front view. If you skip now to the profile view, we've been drawing that forward protrusion of those long lashes. Okay, let's put the bottom lid in on the profile view. And in that profile view, the bottom lid usually then connects to the front of the cheek, which is that line dropping forward like that. Okay. Now, we might as well put in the eyebrow in the front view. The eyebrows, I'll usually sketch an outline of it first so that I know where I'm going with it. And then over here, we need to, in the profile view, we need to start defining the actual front edge or front line of the face. So we've got this little 45-degree angle sort of extending up from the tip of the eyelashes for that to indicate the brow. And then the curve of the brow and then going up to the forehead. And then the eyebrow sort of arching over that. So it's just interesting to sort of take this in for a second, looking at that side view, look at the positioning of the eyebrow, how much more forward it is than the front of the eye, and then look at your front view and realize that that's what we're drawing there. And that's why when you go to shade, assuming it's a top-down lighting, it's going to be casting a shadow there over the upper lid. All right, so at this point, we can probably move on to the nose. So noticing the distance between the sort of the line on the edge of the nose on the reference image here, the distance between here and here, we can use that as a guide now and sort of say, right, this line needs to be about here. And comes down into this the bulb, the main part of the nose, the main protrusion of the nose here. We can sort of sketch that as a sphere. Something like that. Don't have to get likeness right here, we just want to sort of get the point of these three-dimensional shapes. From there we can put in the, as you're sketching the front view, just keep looking at the side view too. Remind yourself what 3D shape you're actually indicating in your front view. We're drawing the sides of the nostrils as fairly dark lines here, but really when you draw a face, if you're drawing from a photo reference, you should look and see what the lighting's doing. Sometimes you can't even really see the edge of a nostril, or sometimes the edge of the nostril is actually a highlight, not a point of shadow. So if you're painting, you might not even put it in until you're putting in the lights. All right, so now let's put the nose in side view. And this is quite interesting. We're drawing the same thing, but just from a different view. Well, we could start here, because we want to connect things, we could start actually with the nostril, lining it up. We can sort of say we know the nostril's about here, because it connects to that line that we put in to indicate the front of the cheek. And then we can sort of indicate this, the bridge of the nose under here, just with a light line like that, just a guideline. It's easier to connect things than guess where they're going to sit in empty space. Now it's pretty much a 45-degree angle of that. This is, sorry, the bridge of the nose. I don't know, before when I was talking about the base of the nose. 45-degree angle, and then the main sort of protrusion, the little bulb at the base of the nose here, sticks out a bit more. There we go, and this is interesting because this is the actual protrusion in space of the thing that we were just drawing before from a front view. Very good to keep this in mind no matter what angle you're drawing the face from. And we can put in the nostril now. Okay. Like I've made his nose a little stick out a bit too much, so I'm just going to raise the front of it back a little bit. All right. Now, maybe we should actually keep going down on the profile view here and continue down to the lips. Now, let's notice where the front line of the upper lip intersects the nostril, because that'll tell us where to start. So we say that it's roughly here. And then the upper lip protrudes slightly more than the lower lip. Just take note of that. Okay. Drawing lips from the side is not easy. It's quite a challenge, and it's just something that takes practice. And as I said before, they vary massively between people anyway. So it's something that you just have to practice and practice and keep practicing. Drawing the profile in general is not easy. All right, so, and I'm just now sketching in under the bottom lip. See how that curves backwards. It's interesting to look at that and then look at our front view reference, and you can see there's that shadow there. And that's the shadow because that downward facing plane tucks in like that. So it tucks in and then it comes back out for the protrusion of the chin. And now we can move over and sketch the front view of the lips here. Now we might just put a little notch in to indicate that the very top area of the lip there under the nose. But then from there, I would usually probably go and draw the actual occlusion shadow, the center line of the mouth. And then I would connect that up very lightly with the upper lip line. There's no reason for that to be dark because it would be catching the light, not in shadow from it. And then you can sketch in the darker line for under the lower lip because that would be in shadow. And sometimes you could also put a slight convex line to indicate the top of the chin, like you can do this kind of thing. So having sketched the main features, I think it's worthwhile now just putting in a little bit of shadow, because this is where we can look between our front and side view and see why there is shadow in the places that we're putting it. So I'm just going to grab my other brush. Usually the first part that I shade of the face is this backward, downward facing plane under the eyebrow. Oops. It all depends on the lighting, and of course if you've got that sort of upward lighting, something reflecting from below, casting light upward on the face, it would reverse. This would be a highlight area. But generally, if it's daylight or something, light's coming from above, and that's likely to be cast in shadow. The upper lid of the eye might then, as you can see in the profile view, protrude forward, and so that might actually catch the light. So shadow under the brow, but it might be highlighted on that upper lid. So put in your shadows, after you do a shadow on the front view, put in the same shadow in the profile view. With the two. This light shadow under the lower lid, because that plane tucks in, downward, backward facing plane. And we've got the shadow area under the nose. Maybe on that one shaded on the profile view first, so that you can clearly see why it's in shadow. And then do it over on the front view. Doing very simplified shadows here. Obviously, we're drawing this like it was a comic book or something, or like a storyboard. But these sort of main shadows would still hold true if you were doing a more finished painting. And usually, as a general rule, the upper lip, because it tucks in and is a downward facing plane, will generally be darker. And so it's a good idea to slightly darken the upper lip area as an inward facing plane. And then same for below the bottom lip, that area below the bottom lip before the chin starts to protrude. That shadow there. And because light often is not just coming from directly above, it's usually also coming from one side, or it might be reflected from one side. That little ridge in that below the nose, above the upper lip, that little ridge often catching sideways light is like a little valley in shadow. That's why you can see a very faint shadow on that front view. That's what that's about. So you can also put that in. There's usually some kind of shadow cast there. you can see as soon as I put that in, it gives three-dimensional form to that front view. Suddenly we can see that there's sort of a valley there. All right. So although I know that all seems pretty basic, but I hope that by switching from front to side view like that and going slowly and shading them at the same time, that it's helped to see how these are three-dimensional forms. It's three-dimensional terrain. And the more you look at it that way, the easier it becomes to define the face and expressions and everything using light and shadow, not using lines. And we've got just enough time to have a look at the ear now. So I'm just going to have to shift things on my canvas a bit here. I'll go like this. I'll go like this. I'm hoping I can just move everything over. Yep. I can put the ear back, but that's in the way. So, right, I'm going to draw the ear separately and then I'll tack it back on. All right. Ears are also all different shapes and sizes, but they have some shared anatomy, obviously, between them. And you can pretty quickly learn a shorthand way to draw ears. So obviously, normally I would start with firstly, you can see this reference enough, can't you, that you can see kind of the distance between the eye and the ear. If I just draw a line there,
yeah,
across there, yeah, I don't know how you'd measure that. Say we take the width of that eye there, it's sort of like 1, 2, 3 of those before you get to the ear. So just give yourself a second to get that distance right. If you get that wrong, it can look really bad. I've done that a lot in the past when I was learning. If you put the eye too close to the ear or too far back, it can look really weird. So it's actually kind of a critical distance, this one, between the eye and the ear.
You take that measurement from the bridge of the nose, Dylan, or from the front of the eye?
Oh, no, from wherever you like. I was just trying to provide a guide here. So in other words, I'm going to draw this in red, right? So if we say this eye is so wide.
Yeah, okay.
We draw a line between here and here. We can sort of
Yep.
say that 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, so another four of that size before you get to the ear.
Okay, thanks.
Usually if you're drawing the face, there's other ways to help measure that, because there would be a bit of a hairline in here, which would come up something like this. And you'd sort of, okay, right, I've got this amount of distance between the eye and the sideburn here. And then we've got the sideburns, and then the ear can start there. Sometimes you just use some way of measuring that when you're looking at your reference photo or model or whatever. It's also something that just comes with practice. You sort of get a feel for not putting the ear too far forward or too far back.
Yep, thanks.
So when drawing the ear, I usually just start at, now just as, once again, another little proportion and connection thing here. Often the top of the ear sort of roughly lines up with the top of the eye, and the bottom of the ear often lines up with, well, it usually lines up with kind of the bottom of the nose. Here it's going a little bit lower. It's sort of going down to almost to the lip. So it does differ between people, but as a rough guide, that should be the ear size, and that using that guide will stop you drawing. You definitely don't want to draw ears too small. They look really weird if they're too small. Better too big than small. All right. So let's do an ear. So normally I would sketch the top of the ear here, and it's not circular. It has little flat sections. Often the top section is a little bit flat before it starts curving back around. And notice that it's sort of angled this way at the front. I just drew a red line in there. Don't draw that in, but that's how you want to see that angle. You've got the bottom lobe here. And that varies as the model gets older, that gets bigger and longer. Usually then the next thing I put in drawing an ear is just the this line at the top here, indicating that downward plane. Now, this usually forms a little ridge, shoot thing here that goes down into the the hollow of the ear there. Then you've got this little lump here, which probably has a name that I don't know. So that little form there, if you can remember that, that's kind of the main thing you need to know. Now this where I'm sketching here, if you just watch this, this usually sort of tucks up around like this and it comes up here. And then, different to this model actually here, what I normally draw up here is just a little kind of like that. See that little U that I drew? Usually, because there's usually two ridges, one going left like this and one going right, like a fork in the road, like that. You don't normally put all that in, but that's what you're indicating, is this sort of this single ridge turning into two and forking off like that. So I'm going to differ from the model here and just draw it like that because that's how I normally do as a shorthand for drawing ears. And if you can remember that rough pattern, that can be your template for drawing ears, and you know they usually just vary a bit model to model with that. And I'm going to put in some shadow here because this is the actual ear canal here. I'm putting that dark shadow. And then up the top here, there is usually just some cast shadow. The top of the ear like that. The top of that whatever you want to call that, ridge or fold or whatever. So that's how I draw ears. Now, I just want to see if I can put this back on the model. Actually, okay, I'm going to leave my ear off. What we want to do now, if we can quickly in our 5 minutes, is just draw the ear from the front view now. You've got your reference of the side view. I have to get rid of mine here in order to be able to see this. So we do it in the same order here, starting at the top of the ear and drawing this bit around. I'm just going to get rid of this part of my face on the right here. It's distracting a bit. Okay. And that lower lobe. And we repeat that same pattern that we went through looking at the profile view of the ear, but now we're just drawing it from the front. And because we just drew it from the side, as you draw it from the front here, you can now feel the three-dimensionality of it, hopefully. You're doing the same thing again, but in a foreshortened way from the front view. And you can put in those same shadows if you like. And if you want, you can drop in a little bit of shading there. Shading under that top overhanging section of the ear. And a little bit of shadow on the base of the lobe, just to indicate that it's curving away there. All right, so that fit in pretty much perfectly with our time. So I hope that was useful.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's nice drawing both views at the same time.
Yep.
I've actually never done that before, but
Me neither.
it's a useful exercise. And if you can find photos online of the same person from a front and side view, I think it's a very useful exercise to keep doing with as many different people as you can find. Celebrities are good for that because you've got usually photos. It might not be the same photo taken at the same time, but you can get those two angles and you can compare. And that way your mind starts forming a 3D model rather than just seeing it as lines on a flat surface. So, yeah. Thanks for taking part.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Dylan.